Macbeth is Shakespeare's shortest tragedy, and in some respects, a relatively simple play. Its structure follows a standard conventional form, the rise and fall of a great man. The first part of the play follows Macbeth's rise to power. By Act 3, he has assumed the kingship, and the rest of the play follows the disintegration of all he has achieved, the process of which culminates with his death, spoiler alert, and the installment of a new king. In that sense, it is a very simple play. But if we dare to take a closer look, and we dare, we might see that Shakespeare is presenting us with a psychological portrait of a hero. His motivation, his response to events as they unfold, and his disintegration. Shakespeare invites his audience to consider the humanity of Macbeth and the tragic flaw that all of us may have. In many ways, we are all Macbeths if we dare to take the time to look. It is this profound examination that makes Macbeth more than a simple play. Critics have called Macbeth one of Shakespeare's most compelling characters, and the play itself is, of all of Shakespeare's greatest tragedies, one that spends little time on building up the suspense around the character, as seen in Hamlet or Julius Caesar, but rather this play deals almost immediately in analyzing the character. So I would like to begin our exploration of the play by doing two things: establishing some historical context and examining the character of Macbeth briefly. William Shakespeare was born in 1564 and died in 1616. The play Macbeth was written in 1606 during the reign of two monarchs, Queen Elizabeth I and King James I. An astute student of Shakespeare will notice that the plays he wrote under James's rule were darker and more cynical plays, quite possibly a result of the combination of the turmoil of the Jacobean era and the king's fascination with demonology. He wrote Demonology in 1599, and both Hamlet and Macbeth reflect elements of this dissertation. But more on this shortly. James Stuart, James VI of Scotland, was not the direct heir to the British throne. But as Elizabeth had no heirs, she selected him to become monarch. James's reign saw the extensive and brutal execution of Catholics. Remember, the 1534 Act of Supremacy, only 72 years earlier, had solidified Britain's break from the Catholic Church and made the king the supreme head of the Church of England. The monarch was God's divinely appointed representative on earth, and it was a mortal sin to think that you could aspire to the throne without being divinely chosen. So before you wonder about King James, his selection and ascension would have been interpreted as divinely ordained, and so he booked little opposition. And those who did oppose, well, let's just say they met untimely deaths. Two things about context. The play Macbeth is loosely based on the Scottish king Macbeth, who ruled successfully in the 10 and 1100s, and Shakespeare's knowledge of the work Holinshed's Chronicles, written in 1527 by Hector Boyce, was giving an account of Scottish history to that date. The main thematic issues of the play, treason, regicide, the demonic and the supernatural, were all subject matter fascinating to the king, evident in his writings, the Demonology and the Basilicon Doron. More on this. Now, why would Shakespeare write about these things? While Elizabeth I reigned, Shakespeare's acting company was called the Chamberlain's Men, and it is known that they performed for the court, her court. Upon her death, they quickly became known as the King's Men, And since monarchs and members of the aristocracy were often benefactors for poor acting troupes, King James became Shakespeare's benefactor. It seemed only reasonable that the plays he would create would reflect the king's interests and passions. About the king's interest. According to the British Library collection on Shakespeare and the Renaissance, the Daemonology, written in 1597, asserts James's full belief in magic and witchcraft and aims to prove the existence of such forces. The work speaks to witches vanishing and their invisible flight, their raising of storms, dancing and chanting, and their gruesome potion ingredients. The dissertation also lays down what sort of trial and punishment these practices merited. For King James, this was death. So here we're speaking about sorcery. Critics of Shakespeare have presented two thoughts. Shakespeare's portrayal of witchcraft in the play Macbeth caters to the king's interests, or it is a more subversive comment on his involvement in witch hunting, an underhanded political comment on Shakespeare's part, or perhaps just a bit of two. Either way, within the pages of the play, one can understand Macbeth's confusion and attempts not to legitimize the meeting with the witches, while at the same time acting on their prophetic skills. The Basilican Doron, written in 1599, was a letter King James wrote to his son Henry, outlining the good tenets of effective rule and leadership, being a good Christian and being a good king. The letter does confirm the idea of the divine right of kings. It speaks to the wife a king should have, not Lady Macbeth from my reading, and the importance of maintaining loyalty among your subjects. Versions of both are available online for anyone who may have an interest in delving further. At this point, I will say, be prepared for a few spoilers. I'll do my best, but spoilers do exist. Macbeth's story is obviously a tragedy. At the start of the play, he's a very successful and highly esteemed member of society. He's one of Duncan's best soldiers. He is loaded with honors and is expected to receive even more accolades for his deeds. He has a wife who loves him, and we can debate this later, and a nice piece of property, his castle at Inverness. The play opens with us learning of his heroic deeds. We see his camaraderie with his friend Banquo and the obvious regard the King Duncan has for him. Fast forward through 5 acts. Shakespeare's plays always follow a 5-act structure. At the end of the play, Macbeth is alone. He has lost his friends. Well, he kills some. His wife is dead. He has fallen out of grace. Macbeth's loneliness is as a result of his decisions. Nothing he has done is forced upon him. No one tricks him, although some may say the witches did, but that's up for debate. The reality is that he is the architect of his own destruction, and the more he tries to come to terms with his choices, is the further he goes along the slippery slope of darkness. The end of the play seems to be the inevitable consequence of what he has chosen to do for his own reasons. Whatever the nature of his challenge to life, he destroys himself, and we will see how this destruction unfolds. I'll end by saying this. Shakespeare's play Macbeth is, in many respects, a cautionary tale, warning any other potential regicides of the awful fate that will inevitably overtake them. On the other hand, it is a stark reminder of how easily our drive for ambition and power can overtake our rational thinking and lead even the best of us down a path that we may not so easily be able to return from.